Evening, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I am doing very well. We have some lingering folks here and some people that are weaning their way through the internet to find us. All right. Terrific. Well, hold on one sec. Okay. With the dulcet shushing, we have got your undivided attention and ours. Brilliant. So thank you everybody for joining us. We're trying to make a little casual setting here on King Street West in Toronto. We're joined this evening by Matt LeMay out of London. Very excited that he is spending the evening with us and stayed up late for the occasion. So we're particularly thankful for that. A couple quick shout outs for the Toronto Product Management Association sponsors, making the community possible and also participating in the kind of growing tech scene here in Toronto with us. Special thanks to our space sponsor, Q4, who makes investor relations software. Learn more at q4inc.com. And for those of you interested in our mentorship program, registration is still open. Really good interest expressed here. We're looking for mentors, tons of mentee interest. So if you are interested in participating as a mentor, we are especially looking for you. We are, of course, looking for more mentees as well, if you would all like to participate. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Matt LeMay. So Matt is a internationally recognized product leader, author, and consultant. He has written not only Agile for Everybody and not one, but two editions of Product Management in Practice, which we'll factor into this evening's conversation around career pathing. He is also a co-founder of a consultancy called Sudden Compass, which is helping organizations put customer centricity into practice and working on digital transformation and strategy for many mega cap companies, amongst many others. Matt has also been a product manager in the past with firms like Songza, Bitly, and he is also a musician and has recently put out a new album. Matt, tell us about your love of music.
Sure. Funny enough, my love of music is in a roundabout way what got me into product management, which is a roundabout answer to a fairly direct question. But I've always loved music. I've loved listening to music. I loved making music. My first job was as a music journalist when I was but a very enthusiastic teenager with a fair amount of time on my hands who really wanted free CDs. This is back when free CDs were a value add, not something not something to be recycled. And yeah, I finished a record with my friend Todd. The name of the project is Gold LeMay, like the fabric. His last name is Goldstein. My last name is LeMay. So we thought that would be a cute project name. And we made a record of fussy math rock that I really enjoy.
Fantastic. I've given it a listen. I enjoy it. I recommend it. Golden LeMay. So everybody look for that after this evening. It would be great to get to know you a bit, Matt. Tell us about, a favorite product that you're into at the moment.
Sure. To be quite on the nose, I'm really enjoying. So I used to, when I lived in Portland, Oregon, before I moved here to London, I had a basement with drums and with amplifiers and with lots of music equipment, which was delightful. I now live in a small flat in London, so I no longer have those things, but there's a software product called Superior Drummer 3, which is basically a virtual drummer, and it is endlessly customizable. And and endlessly programmable. So I am back to programming drums rather than playing drums, which is a different way to create similar things, which is always interesting when you have two entirely different processes that yield similar outputs. So Superior Drummer 3 has been a wild ride these last couple of weeks. It's been fun to learn how to conjure drum tracks, not by playing drums, but by tapping a little keyboard and then clicking on things for a long time.
Nice. A few folks that I worked with in the past were really into the I forget, I don't know what they were called, the box with all the buttons on it, and you would program the buttons and they're all pushing the buttons. And
yep, like an MPC.
Yeah. So, you know, transposing that into the virtual space, I imagine, is quite different versus the physical there, which is always like, what is that engagement? What is it? Physical? Is it virtual? Are they here? Are they somewhere else? And kind of experiencing it. So taking this a little bit backwards into more of the product world, you've worked in product for over 12 years now. Your approach, your perspective has likely evolved. Tell us a little bit about the shifts over time over that last dozen years or so.
Yeah, so I think the most direct way to answer that question is by speaking to probably the biggest change between the first and second editions of Product Management and Practice. So the first edition of Product Management and Practice came out in 2017, when my experience leaned a little bit more towards startups. And I said, you know, if you have clear and actionable goals, prioritization is easy. And having worked with larger firms, it's never that easy. I think I've come to recognize that some degree of disconnect or tension between the different layers or vectors of strategy, whether that's your team strategy versus your company strategy, or your company vision versus your team mission, or your OKRs versus your KPIs. It's never that straightforward. It's never that instructive. And there are steps you have to take anyway. I think I've really come to appreciate that so much of product management is about taking a step even when you don't feel 100% confident, because you're probably never going to feel 100% confident. The correct next step is probably never going to present itself to you without you putting something out there. Ideally, as I suggest in the book, putting multiple options out there to evaluate and saying, of these three different things we could do, which one do we think is actually going to be right for us? And having the courage both to synthesize those options and to have a point of view and a recommendation between those options.
I've definitely received some feedback earlier on in my career about finding an option, becoming very satisfied with the solution, and kind of dialing into it a little bit too quickly, and others not being convinced that it necessarily was the best option. And so I think having a bunch to choose from, collectively evaluating them, or at least being able to show a bit more reasoning on how you ended up there, certainly could be helpful. I suggest it to folks here. So let's go back earlier and think about that first product management job. Want to talk about careers, want to talk about the earlier end of the spectrum, want to talk about product leadership a bit, and these career journeys. So you know, describe a bit for us that first product management job, what you were doing. How comfortable were you in that role?
Uncomfortable constantly. It was really, really difficult. I actually remember, I don't think this made it into the book, but here in the safety of this group, I will say I definitely went home from my first day of work and cried and cried and cried and said to myself, I am not cut out for this. What am I doing here? I have no idea what this job is. I have no idea how to do it. I was dealing with technical leadership who I think were looking at me kind of like, who's this guy who's not good enough at code to be a developer? I was dealing with sales leadership who were kind of like, who's this guy who isn't necessarily going to help us sell anything? I was the first product manager at a company that didn't really have a clear need for product managers. I asked for a product manager title after Googling bad at code, tech job, decent salary, and found my way into it. But gosh, I'd say the first 3 to 5 years, which involved on paper an ascent from product manager to product leader, were just nonstop challenges, nonstop imposter. I don't even want to say syndrome, because I think some parts of it were well earned and taught me things I needed to know, but nonstop feeling out of my depth. And I will say that over time, what changed wasn't that I no longer felt out of my depth, but that I grew comfortable feeling out of my depth and accepted the fact that I will always feel out of my depth to some degree, which I still do in the work I do today. So I think for me, part of the journey to a more relaxed and sustainable path was recognizing that I'll never feel like I have this all figured out. I'll never feel like I know all the answers or I'm fully equipped to do this job. And that's okay.
Yeah. Getting comfortable with ambiguity,
Mhm.
and convincing the people that write your checks each week that this is an okay thing, that there are going to be uncertainties, and taking those bets, like you mentioned. You know, we're in very different positions, everybody in the room and the folks that are here. Some people are at very large firms and there's lots of established process, but you also may have leaders that don't get product management, right? And so part
Yeah.
of it is not only understanding the role and what is that role at that firm, but it's also educating the folks that you work with. Um, and it changes, right? Product management is a very dynamic role. I was talking with a friend recently. When she and I met 20 years ago, her title was visual designer, and now she's a director of product management and innovation strategy and leading a UX community, and has kind of transcended that small space. Lots of folks came from art and so forth. But Matt, from your perspective, how have you seen the product management evolve over the last decade, and maybe trends around current must-have skills in the role?
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like a couple years ago, product management became very framework and process oriented, and we are currently in the well-earned backlash to that. I think there is a reclamation of that ambiguity, a reclamation of the context first nature of product management, an acknowledgement that there is no one size fits all approach to this. There's no one way to do it. And in doing so, my hope is that the skills that have been traditionally thought of as soft skills are coming back to the center of the conversation. That enough people have found that you can't just throw a bunch of people into a framework and voila, success happens. That organizations are complex systems full of complex people serving complex people in complex markets. And the idea that product management can be reduced to a single set of actions or skills or anything that is the same context to context, team to team, person to person. It's a nice idea, but what I'm seeing more is, and I'm seeing this in some ways that I feel really good about, in some ways that I feel less good about, companies being more contextual and more specific about what exactly do we need, why exactly do we need it, and what are the skills that somebody will bring to bear in order to do that.
I wanted to go in a slightly different direction from here, which is this idea of, so in IDEO and McKinsey, they're talking about T-shaped people. So I
Yeah.
think, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying yes. I'm just enthusiastically
Yes,
participating in the conversation.
T's for life. So the top of the T representing sort of generalized skills, and probably soft skills are in there amongst others, and then the vertical axis being specialization, whether it's in a particular slice of product management, or maybe it's a domain expertise of a particular part. So you could imagine like healthcare, and then more specifically still virtual healthcare, right? And so um, in the context of T-shaped folks and specialists, um, where do you see the beginner, the intermediate product managers in these different profiles in the community? And do you have a suggestion, one over another, or perhaps for different circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it depends. There are certain industries and fields where that kind of true T-shaped individual who understands the ins and outs of a particular industry or a particular regulatory framework or a particular, you know, business, I think that makes a lot of sense. Having worked with people who are specialists, who are, product managers working on jet engines, or product managers working on like really specific healthcare systems, like absolutely, it's going to be really hard to get someone up to speed on that who's never experienced these systems before. I would argue in some cases, there's also benefit to somebody participating with new eyes or with, a fresh mindset. But to me, kind of the defining characteristic of a product manager is the ability to go T-shaped in context. In other words, good product managers don't necessarily have that existing bottom part of the T, but they can go as deep as they need to on a subject. Good product managers never say, oh, I'm not a technical person, I can't understand that. Or like, oh, I don't know what this is. They are relentlessly curious. They ask and they learn, and they go as deep as they need to deliver what they need to deliver. Now, again, I think that in certain situations, you don't necessarily have the time for somebody to go from that horizontal line all the way to the bottom of the T. But I think, to me, the most important characteristic of good product managers in general is that fearlessness and curiosity to go deep and learn a lot about something that might not be their area of expertise or their area of interest or where they're coming from, if that's really important. Because the reality is also, there will be times where you have to go kind of multiple T-shaped. I don't think that's a letter. It's like a little picture of a house or something, to go house shaped. But, day to day, situation to situation, product managers have to skill up and learn about new things really, really, really quickly. And again, I think that curiosity and that fearlessness are the most important characteristics. And how far along the T you need somebody to be in specific context depends a lot on the role in the industry and the company.
So, being on the back end of this process, and having had these conversations with various executives and saying, what advice do you have for me as I'm trying to build my career? I can very comfortably say what my journey was and the choices that I made, and in hindsight probably would have shifted this or that. But a lot of people early on in product management are they're trying to figure this out, and it's really hard, I think, from the outside of an organization to kind of get to know what is going the type of person that's going to be successful in a given target organization. So I'm curious, like, how would a person earlier in their career think about this from the outside looking in, and how might the earlier stage product manager kind of sell themselves to that organization to help solve their problems?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, if I'm being very candid, the things I look for when I'm hiring product managers are not the things that everybody looks for. And I think that by and large, the hiring of product managers is a really badly broken thing. I see a lot of product managers getting hired for being able to confidently BS their way through things that they don't understand, which is the exact behavior of bad product managers. When I interviewed at a famous high-profile technology company, I was asked a question which really somebody without expertise in electrical engineering had no business answering. And when I said I would inquire with somebody who has that expertise, that was not an acceptable answer. They really wanted me to, show that I could unpack but that's not the reality of the role. I think there is unfortunately a tendency among companies to be very risk averse when hiring product managers and to look for people who can talk a good game and spout out product management theory and act like they have answers to every question already ready, when in fact, those are the worst product managers I've ever worked with, and the people who I dread working with. The people who, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to go do some research, we're like, oh, cool, I'm going to look up. They're like, yeah, well, obviously we need to do this, and this is the answer, because if that's a level 7 product horizon, then if we're really doing an MVP and validating the MVP via A/B testing, then we're going to find out. And I'm like, like that's none of those are real things. Like, please stop. I'm very tired. So I think the unfortunate reality is, if you try to sell yourself by being other than who you are, you're probably going to wind up in a really unhappy position. I don't want to, I think it's good to read everything you can about product management. I think understanding how traditional product management interviews work is good. It's always good to understand how these things work. But I think once you start play acting what you think a good product management interview looks like, rather than speaking honestly and being present and answering questions the way you as a human person answers questions, you run the risk of finding yourself in a situation where you're brought into a team where the expectations and the reality are misaligned with each other. So I think there's an unfortunate tendency, especially as product management becomes a very desirable field for people to work in, to see interviews as a game to be won, or a challenge to be won, an enemy to be vanquished. And I do really poorly when I interview that way still to this day. Like, I'm pretty honest and transparent about what I think, what I've done well, what questions I have, how I would approach things. And as a result, I don't make it through the first rounds of some interviews, and I get hired for some jobs. And I think if you're looking for a healthy, sustainable product management opportunity, being yourself in the interview is really important.
Yeah, I'll take sincerity every day of the week. I don't want somebody that's really good at selling and then shows up for their first day and is not suited for the role and not a great cultural fit and everything else. So I don't need whatever the few good men courtroom scene, and like going out with some triumphant monologue in the interview to compel me to then not be able to deliver the goods later.
I was interviewing somebody once, interviewing them for a job, and they were like, well, I studied Agile with so-and-so. And I'm like, oh, I don't know who that is. And this guy goes, you don't know who that is? He's one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto. And he realized in that moment that he had just totally tanked the interview by being like, you don't know who that is, to the person interviewing him. And it was kind of funny. I was like, womp womp, like that did not go how you thought it was going to go. And I did not hire that person.
Yeah, we've been there, or rather I've been there. This room is probably far more attuned. I was with a hiring manager, and she said, what about so-and-so? And I was like, it was in the job description. That's how I went to know to go look for this thing. And she asked me something later on in the process, and I was like, oh, that sounds really unfamiliar. And she goes, it was in the job description. And I was like, oh, right. I see how this is going. This isn't going to work out well. So bunch of humility on all sides of the coin will definitely work out better.
For sure.
So we talked about earlier stage career. Let's go to the other side of the table for a bit around management, around mentoring product managers. And a number of folks in the community here are further along in their careers. They're building departments, they're building teams of product managers. Could you help us understand an overview of your core principles?
Sure. So in product management and practice, there are 4 core skills that I propose as the sort of general top of the T that you'll need for hiring product managers or for being a product manager. Those are communication, organization, research, and execution. I've worked with some companies that change it to score and add strategy. I've worked with some that add facilitation and make it force, which I am quite fond of. But the idea basically is that product managers need to be able to communicate with people, to organize their team for sustainable success, to research, to understand their users and the reality of their users, and then to execute the tasks that need to be executed in order for them to achieve their goals for their team. So there are guiding principles for each of those in the book. Those principles, some of them have changed from the first to second edition. But I find that, the other one that's not in there, when I interview product managers, the one thing I always check for is, do they not get defensive? Anytime I'm interviewing product managers, if I'm talking through an issue, I'll always throw some wrench in whatever they're talking about. Be like, oh, let's say that doesn't work for this reason, or okay, let's say we do some research and we find that that's not, or let's say that that turns out to be an untenable solution. If they dig in and get defensive, then I'm like, that's it, that's the end. And if they can engage and be interested and be like, oh, cool, like help me understand that, that's always a really good sign to me. I think 90% of bad product management is driven by some flavor of defensiveness. And the number one thing, the kind of anti-skill that I try to filter for most aggressively is defensiveness. That's the opposite of the core skills.
So I'm very glad that you've never interviewed me, and I wish we had had this conversation far earlier in my career. So how do you see organization done poorly, or maybe some examples of how that plays out?
Yeah, so organization's an interesting one. The guiding principle for organization in the second edition of product management and practice is make yourself obsolete. And that's, I don't want to say controversial because I don't think it's even notable enough to be controversial, but I found time and time again, good product managers seek to take their skills, take their perspective, take what they know, and systematize it for their team. Bad product managers are bottlenecks. Bad product managers feel like they need to be in the mix, constantly making every decision, making themselves indispensable. They are, again, driven by defensiveness, by insecurity. They say, well, if my team can operate without me, then why am I even here? What if I lose my job? What if they don't like me? Good product managers say, I want my team to be able to do everything I do as well as I can. And I found that in practice, my number one test for that, which is also, again, sort of defensiveness adjacent, is if you're a product manager and someone on your team says, what should we build next? Do you see that as a good thing or a bad thing? And if you see that as a good thing, you probably are not doing organization well. Because if they have to ask you in the moment, what do we work on next? If you haven't built the systems for your team to do prioritization, to look at goals, to say, what do we believe is most likely to help us achieve those goals? If we have extra capacity this sprint, how do we fill that capacity with things that we know are important? If they have to come to you and say, hey, what do I work on next? You are probably failing at your important tasks of organization. And I say that in a very self-incriminating way, because when I started out in product management, nothing made me feel better than my team being like, Matt, what should we build next? I was like, yay, I'm important, I'm strategic, I get to help decide what we build next. And it wasn't until years later that I looked back on that and said, gosh, I was really not doing a great job because my team didn't have a sense of why they were doing what they were doing. They didn't have the systems in place to do that work effectively. If I was on vacation, I was checking things constantly, like, oh, I need to put out this fire, I need to do this. A friend of mine who used to work in finance told me a story, which I think is a fairly extreme story, but I think about it a lot, about a new VP coming in and saying to all the product directors, you're all going on vacation for a month, and if your team can't work without you, you're fired. Which is, again, a very extreme example, but I understand the idea there, that if you have made yourself such a bottleneck, so indispensable that you need to be in the weeds with your team every second, then that to me suggests that you are not delivering as much value to your team as you could otherwise.
So I would put forth anybody that gets hired as a product manager is likely opinionated, right? They've got something to share, but I still find that team members come and they'll say, what do you think? And they want me to go first.
Yeah,
And in some conversations with team members that are trying to grow in their career, I'm saying, look, I know you have opinions. Why don't you try floating your opinion first? And then we'll validate against what I think about it. I don't know. What do you think about that approach, or like how do you get that voice to come out in your absence, or even to come voluntarily to you?
that's a great question. This is, again, where I love optionality. I think that if people are stuck, giving them options is a great way to get someone else's perspective out there. I just worked with a team on this, where a product manager was working with their team and they were trying to figure out what their target is for new users to onboard in the next quarter. They were like, well, we can't come up with it because we don't have analytics. And I was like, well, do you know when a new user is onboarded? They're like, yeah, but we don't have a baseline because we haven't been measuring. It's a new product. And I was like, okay, fair enough. But how many do you think you'll be able to onboard? They're like, we don't know. And I said, okay, 10, 100, or 1,000. And then the conversation actually moved forward. They were like, well, if it's 10, then like we probably fail. And somebody on the team was like, I actually think we can do 1,000. I was like, all right, let's commit to that as an ambition. So again, I think there's this magical combination of specificity and optionality that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of how to move teams forward. That if we provide multiple specific options, it can actually kind of fast forward us through a lot of theoretical debate and get us to a point of really, again, getting into the weeds in a good way and saying, okay, where exactly are we going? How exactly do we think we can get there?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people get stuck in that path because they don't have facts, and they're
Yeah,
they're kind of grounded in the, well, if I make an incorrect assumption, it's like, okay, well, declare your assumptions, declare your beliefs. I'm kind of cribbing from John Cutler, who we spoke with last month, and this really resonated with me. Like, call out your facts, assumptions, beliefs, and then we
yep,
can decide which of these we're willing to agree to, and the conversation can move forward pretty smoothly.
yep. And I found that in a lot of cases, if you are struggling to identify your facts, assumptions, and beliefs, reverse engineer them from the options. That's another thing that I found really helpful. Susanna Lopez, who's a really phenomenal product leader here in London, I had the pleasure of speaking with her at Product Tank Brighton a couple of weeks ago. And she said that when you're struggling to think about things on that order, you can usually reverse engineer them from past decisions. And I really like that as a way to get unstuck when you're struggling to identify assumptions, when you're struggling to say, what's our strategy, when you're struggling to say, what are our priorities. If you look at decisions that have actually been made, you can often start to reverse engineer some of those things.
Hmm. I'm gonna have to wrestle with that one. I'm getting caught up thinking about like overfitting when you kind of work
Yeah.
backwards from something that you like the outcome of, and maybe how you got there. I want to go in a slightly different direction. So I like this a lot. In your book, you were telling the story of a young, bold product manager. Let's call him Matt. Is vying for a promotion, but is stopped in his tracks by a wise VP of engineering. And the engineering leader seeks to understand how this aspiring product manager thought of the difference between their current role and the increased responsibilities of a senior product manager. This prompt caught Matt unprepared to continue because he hadn't considered the differences in his current role and the next level. So this situation isn't very surprising, and I think everyone here has likely had some version of this scenario. What would you say to managers here to help their teams grow, maintain line of sight for each of their reports, and help grow towards the next step in their career?
Gosh, I love the way you told that story because it's so much more generous to me than I probably deserve. I mean, what happened was I was a product manager and I was complaining to everyone within earshot. I deserve to be a senior product manager. I've been here for a long time and I work really hard and I deserve it. And it's not fair. And finally, this VP of engineering said, what do you think a senior product manager does? And I had no answer to that question. I was like, I don't know, but I deserve to be one. And he was like, okay, why on earth would somebody promote you into a role if you don't know what that role is? And I was like, because I deserve it and I work really hard. So my takeaway from that was like, oh, and he was very patient with me. He said, I want you to do some research and write down what your current responsibilities are, what the responsibilities of a senior product manager are, and what your growth path is to get there. And that was the biggest gift anyone could have given me. It was such an incredible gift to be like, oh, okay, if I frame this as like, I deserve it, I deserve it, I deserve it, I'm not actually thinking about this the right way. And I have given this gift along to many product managers I coach. I have also advised the managers of those product managers who I coach not to promote product managers because they've been working hard and asking for it. If you don't have a point of view on what specifically you are trying to do, it's going to be really hard for you to do it. A story that is also really interesting to me, I was coaching a product leader, and somebody came to this product leader and said, I deserve to be a director of product. I'm that good. This product leader said, okay, well, you've never managed anyone before. What can we do about that? Product manager said, well, that's, so-and-so got promoted and they never managed anyone before. And this product leader said, I'm so sorry you just said that, because I can't move forward with this now. If you had said to me, I know I have things to learn. Here's my path that I've charted for myself to learn how to be a really good people manager. I'm going to take this course. I'm going to do this. I've been being mentored by this person. I'm going to get there, so I'm really confident. Then we could have actually had a serious conversation about this. But if you are not able to recognize the areas where you have growth to do and chart a path for yourself to do that growth, then you're not acting like a director of product. And I have had many situations where I've had to say to a person like, if you don't know what your contribution is to the business, then you are not acting like a senior product manager. If you can't say, here's what the business will bet. My friend David Dewey, who I work with at MailChimp, asks my favorite question when people come to him asking for a promotion. I have stolen this question and used it a ton, which is, what could the business accomplish with you in this promoted role that cannot accomplish with you in your current role? And I love that question, because it's a question about the value you bring to the business, and it forces you to really think about, what is the role? What is the impact of that role? Why am I going to do well in that role? So again, I have stolen that question and use it with great gusto now. What could the business accomplish with you in this promoted role that it cannot accomplish with you in your current role? And if somebody cannot answer that question, then they are probably not thinking on the order that I would expect someone beyond an entry-level product manager to be thinking.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, it's a great one. And you're also constantly sizing each other up, the firm and the individual, and there is like motivations, but there is also optionality outside the firm. So
Yeah.
it's like a delicate balance in part between the manager and the employee, and trying to keep them motivated but also give enough recognition. So I appreciate the manager's perspective of that, but that could also be slightly and off-putting, if not more inspiring to the individual. I feel like it could go both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've gone back and forth on this. I think recognition for specific things and positive feedback on specific behaviors is really, really important. Good managers that I've worked with always say, I noticed you did this thing and that's really great. I noticed you did this specific thing, that's really great. Rather than just saying like, I think you're great, I think you're a star. That specific affirmative feedback is really important. But I also think that I've worked with a fair number of product managers who see that feedback as their goal, not the success of the business. And that really worries me. I think good product managers, yeah, we want to be in this role. It's a good role. It is a good career. It pays well. We don't have to know how to write code. There's a lot of things that are great about this role, but the flip side of that is we have a lot of responsibility, and I expect folks in product to take that responsibility seriously, to handle that responsibility like an adult, and to be able to say, yeah, what I do is going to be important to the business. I'm going to prioritize the impact something's going to have on the business, even if it feels like it is sacrificing personal heroism, even if it feels like it is making my life more difficult by having to work across silos or work with people I don't want to work with. I really feel that it is and fair and right to expect that product managers are willing to make those tough choices and willing to do, to do that hard work of understanding the value they bring to the business and prioritizing that value.
So let me challenge a little bit on
Yeah.
the prompt of what more could you do for the business if you were in this role. So from the manager's perspective, how do you know that that person is ready for the promotion, that they should step into the new role with more responsibility? How do you get that confidence, or how should managers be thinking about this?
I think managers should have their own answers to those questions as well. Managers need to have a pretty specific sense of, okay, what do I need people in all these different levels to do? I mean, I don't think there is a universal taxonomy of product manager levels because it is so different from company to company, right? Without naming any names, I interviewed for a VP product role a couple months ago, which I thought I was very well qualified for. And I was told in the first round that I would not be going further because the CEO wanted a product manager whose skills were in mobile first. I can only assume that there are specific reasons for this, and that while that doesn't make sense to me from the outside, it probably makes a lot of sense from the inside. I'd rather be disqualified for a specific reason than be disqualified for a vague reason. And I would rather work with companies and managers who have a clear sense about what specifically they need people to be doing in each role and at each level. So I think for a manager, having a point of view on that is really important as well. And being able to square your point of view with that person's point of view, and being able to say, okay, great, I've seen you excel at these things. I think you need to work on these things. What's our plan? But working in that kind of openness and transparency and saying, cool, that's great. Here's what I need. How do we find a meeting of the minds and chart a course where this makes sense? I will say again, I have found myself at times coaching product managers where I'm like, what growth do you have to do to step into this role? And they're like, nothing, I'm perfect. And that is the least credible thing you can possibly say as a product manager. Don't say that. That to me suggests that you are not taking this work seriously.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want a bit of confidence, but it can go bad with too much overconfidence. This is an area that I've personally struggled with, and I liked your last answer about organization, context, circumstance. But like a framework for assessing product managers, for thinking about their product management skill, their people skill, their process knowledge, and so forth. And these are the kind of three dimensions that Marty Kagan talks about, where within these there are depths, and you kind of assess your report, and the report assesses themselves, and then you come up with some kind of equilibrium and say why you think at a certain level somebody should score such and such. Like that is amongst the most specific, but it's still highly subjective frameworks. I'm curious your reactions to that approach to trying to evaluate level and progression.
Yeah, I love how contextual that is. I love that really makes room for knowing your customers for your particular business, knowing your business model for your particular business, knowing not process as in like, can you, recite the Scrum manual, but process as in, do you understand how this particular organization works? I will say to me, the limitation of that is that it is a knowledge-based model, and knowledge doesn't always translate to action. I've worked with very knowledgeable people who are very bad product managers. I've worked with very knowledgeable people who are terrible collaborators, who are terrible communicators, who hoard knowledge for the sake of, again, advancing their own status at the expense of their teams. So I think, to me, yes, navigating those things, right? Being able to utilize process, being able to work with people, being able to contribute to the business are all great things to pay attention to. I personally, when I'm working with companies, like to look beyond knowledge towards what are the actual actions and behaviors that are being displayed. But I think that approach of coming up with some kind of context-specific scoring matrix is a good approach, and one that I've definitely used before.
Terrific. So coming back to product management and practice, you talk about this difference of remote and distributed teams. So remote companies have centralized office locations and team members are not physically present. Sometimes they are, versus distributed teams where there isn't a centralized office. So, how do these different team setups factor into career progression? And does one setup work better than another for aspiring product managers?
I think it all depends on how you like to work. There are certainly people I know who vastly prefer working remotely. There are people I know who vastly prefer working in an office. There are people I know who vastly prefer a little bit of both. I think it's, again, all about recognizing that context and just saying, okay, what makes sense to me? Where do I feel like I'm thriving? And what's gonna help me have a balanced and sustainable life? Which, again, you can talk to two product managers, as I have, one of whom will say, I need to go to an office every day and be around people, and one who will say, I hope I never have to go to an office and be around people. And I don't think there's any one intrinsically better approach, but I think it's always good to know where you get your energy from and how you feel like you're doing your best work.
Very well said. I'd love to solicit some questions from the audience, either here or online, if anybody has questions for Matt. Please.
Hi. Anyway, first of all, thanks for being here, and so far everything's been really informative. I had to write this down. So you had mentioned that basically that question about what could the business do with you in your promoted role that they can't do with you in your current role. So
Yes.
I'm currently facing this problem where in my organization, the product organization is fairly flat. So we're all called product managers. And somehow my scope of responsibilities has increased over the couple of years to basically I'm going to be adopting my third product line. And so I'm wondering, like, when you say, like, what can they do with me in my promoted role, that I'm basically in my current role, the scope keeps increasing. So it's like they don't really need to, because either I leave because I won't take it anymore, or like, how do I handle that?
That's a really tough one. And again, that depends so much on the people you're reporting to and how things work. I will say, I have been in that situation where I have kind of started to feel like a martyr sometimes, and like, I'm doing so much, and I'm not getting the recognition. So I think having a candid conversation with your manager and saying, hey, I feel like I'm delivering a lot of value to this business, and think about really what you want and why you want it. Do you want a bigger title? Do you want more money? Do you want both of those things? Do you want to have less responsibility? Think about what you want and why you want it and why you think it is the right path, and have that conversation as directly as you feel comfortable having it. But I find that for me personally, when I get into that space where I feel a little martyry, it's really hard for me to think clearly until I step back and I say, what is the outcome I actually want? What is the path that makes the most sense? So whatever clarity you can get to around that, I hope will be helpful to you in having that conversation.
So online question from Dimitri. What is the main reason why you personally get hired?
When I get hired these days, I would say it is probably for me at this point in my career because I am fairly opinionated and uncompromising. I'd like to think. In reality, it's probably because I have Google on my resume. I like to think it's because of my incisive and insightful opinions on product management, but it's probably because of having briefly worked at a company that people think means I'm good at this job.
Matt LeMay, former Google.
Or yeah, ex-Google.
Ex-Google, there you go. So another question in from Lauren. How would you recommend somebody make the pivot from project manager to product manager in tech? Are soft skills more important than coding or technical knowledge from an inside perspective?
Sure. So I think, part of why I came up with the core skills model was I think that there is a set of skills that is unique and critical to product management. I think those do tend to map more to soft skills. In a product management role, you are probably not writing code. So it makes sense that the skills you need would not be the same as the skills as somebody who writes code. I think, again, it depends a lot on the organization. It depends on what kind of product you're going to be working on. Are you going to be working on a hyper-technical product where you really need to be able to understand what those trade-offs look like? Are you not going to be working on a hyper-technical product? I will say, I have rarely been in situations where technical knowledge and skills wind up being more important than the skills traditionally thought of as soft skills. In my own experience, my technical skills were a hindrance as much as they were a help, in that I waltzed into companies being like, hello, fellow developers, how's everyone doing? I can write a PHP. I did coding. And they're like, whatever, grandpa, like, that's not how we do things anymore. So I think, again, that curiosity, that ability to go in and learn voraciously and ask fearlessly is much more important than any pre-existing finite discrete set of technical skills.
Question in from Akshay. How critical is it for product managers to be ideators themselves in contrast to other behavioral elements for career growth?
So perhaps unpopular opinion here, but I think the best product managers never have to come up with their own ideas. They are the creators of the conditions for good ideas being born, but they are not themselves the ideators. Here's why I think this is. As all of you probably know, or at least suspect, product managers tend to have a lot of authority, or I'm sorry, a lot of accountability, a lot of responsibility, and very little authority. Not a lot of authority, very little authority. What that means is that everybody else who has shaped an idea and is advocating for that idea means the idea is more likely to succeed. When I was researching Agile for Everybody, a guy named Jared Dicker, who works at the Washington Post, made a point that I think is really, really, really smart, that the ideas that are most likely to succeed in an organization are the ideas that so many people have touched that nobody can even remember whose idea it was anymore. It wasn't my idea or your idea or that person's idea. So many people have shaped it, and so many people have brought their own perspective to that idea that the idea just sort of lives with the team or lives with the organization. And it's not your idea or my idea or that person's idea or that other person's idea. And I really try to take that to heart because, again, there are moments where I start to get insecure and I'm like, should I have the answers? Should I have the ideas? But I find that if I can create an environment where people understand the goals, they understand the customer, they understand the business, they understand these things well enough that the ideas are literally kind of born out of the context, then those ideas are much more likely to succeed, both in terms of being adopted and in terms of being successful.
A slightly different take on the same in Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age. He talks about architects and editors. And so not being somebody who always has ideas, but being a pretty fine editor myself, I find that was a really great kind of conceptualization of what I bring to the table. So I wouldn't say you have to be an ideator, very much to echo Matt's points. If those ideas are abundant and you can figure out which ones are going to create the different value that your firm needs at that moment in time, you're doing great product management work. And I'd say keep at it. Next question is work-life balance as a product manager. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So there's a subchapter in the second edition of the book called "No, You Don't Need to Work 60 Hours a Week to Be a Product Manager." And it was really important for me to put that in, because if you had asked me 5 years ago about work-life balance, I would have said, no, you have to work all the time. It's a really demanding job. But honestly, time management is part of your job. And if you are burning yourself out, you're probably not doing your job well. Product managers, again, can get defensive, can get insecure. I used to feel that my worth as a product manager depended on how busy I was, because all of the outputs of my work were so ephemeral. I wasn't writing code, I wasn't making designs. What was I doing? I had to be there all the time. And I no longer believe that. I think a lot of the most effective product managers I work with are ones who are ruthless about, like, at this point, I go home. If I need time to think, I block out that time. If I need time to rest and to recover, I block out that time. I would say, especially as you become a product leader, and I say this to people a lot, and I hope that those of you who are in product leadership roles really take this to heart. The standard you set for yourself is the standard you set for your team. So if you are staying in the office till 8 p.m., or if you are answering Slack messages on the weekend, you can tell your team work-life balance all you want, but the standard you set for yourself is implicitly the standard to which everyone on your team believes they will be held. So that work-life balance is not just a matter of personal imperative, it is a matter of team imperative. If you want people on your team to respect work-life boundaries, if you want them to take weekends and take evenings and be healthy boundaried people, you have to learn to be a healthy boundaried person yourself. And that is really hard to do for folks like me who use busyness as a coping mechanism when life is challenging and unpredictable. So I think it's really important, and I think that you have to take it seriously.
So last question for you, Matt. Do you feel like there was a single moment in your career where you felt like you stepped off the hamster wheel and really started making tracks? And what was that moment?
That's such a good question. You know, I remember really clearly when I was at Sansa, having a day where I had done everything I needed to do, and we were doing our daily stand-up. And, you know, we're supposed to say, what are you doing? What are you working on today towards the sprint goal? And I was like, I don't have anything to work on. Is my team going to think I'm lazy? Is my team going to... And I just said, like, hey, everybody, I've got everything done that I needed to. So today I'm going to be doing some research. And if you have any questions, just come to me. Like, I'm here as a resource. You're not interrupting. If you have any questions, come by my desk. Like 3 people came to my desk and asked me really important questions. And one of them even said, yeah, you've been so busy, I just haven't wanted to bother you with this. And I was like, whoa, that's really interesting. Like, when I was making a big show about how busy I was actually having a chilling effect on my team. My team wasn't bringing stuff to me because they didn't want to burden me with even more stuff when I appeared to be so busy. And those things that my team brought to me were really, really, really important. So that was an interesting moment to me of being like, oh, okay, here I've been thinking my team wants to see how busy I am, when in fact that's been stressing them out as well, and has been probably making it harder for me to do my job well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, and really deep appreciation for staying up into the night with us. Again, Matt's joining us from London for those that came in after the start. If we could get a huge round of applause for Matt.
Thanks so much, everybody. And I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me. Matt@LeMay.com. I'm easy to find. I'm on Twitter and on LinkedIn and all the places.
So quick plug again for the book, Product Management in Practice. I was reading through good bits of it for prepping for tonight's discussion and lots of really great insights. Someone else I was speaking with who had been through parts of it appreciated that there was not only practical advice, but also great examples of how this shows up in the workplace. So good for folks at all levels of their journey. And Matt, wishing you the best with the book. I know you're out there talking a good bit about it. So feel free to hang with us. We're just going to wrap up for a quick moment. I am looking for this one, tonight's event. So upcoming events in about a month's time, we are going to be all in person with our panel. So we're going to be talking, it's a partnership with Torchy, it's a UX-based community. So it'll be a joint product management, product design conversation. And then in December, we'll get together for a social and then be working on programming for the winter and springtime forthcoming. And a shout out again to Jenna, who's organized our community book club. First book is 0 to 1. For those not familiar with the format, it's principally online based first. So read the book, ask your questions. If there is a convening, people will get together for a virtual convening or possibly a in person. But join the Slack group. It's in community-book club. And with that, QR code will get you to feedback. Your feedback makes our events possible. Matt joined us at the request of community members, said, we want to hear from Matt LeMay, and Matt was very gracious to join us this evening for the conversation. So one more big round of applause for Matt.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Adam.
And wish you a very fine evening. Thank you.